I didn't wake up to my family at my bedside. I woke up to a ceiling I didn't recognize, the steady beep of a monitor, and a dry, metallic taste that made my mouth feel like it had been packed with cotton. The light above me was too bright, the kind that makes everything look cold and honest, like there's nowhere to hide what's happening. My head felt heavy, not just painful, heavy, as if my thoughts were moving through thick mud. I tried to shift my hand. It barely obeyed. My fingers twitched like they were unsure I was in charge again. There was tape on my arm, a thin tube, and a faint pull somewhere near my wrist. I took a breath, and it scraped, shallow and careful, because even breathing felt like something I had to relearn. Then I turned my eyes to the side and saw her. Not my daughter, not my son, not some relative rushing in with a dramatic gasp. It was my neighbor, the woman from next door. She sat in a stiff plastic chair with a paper cup of hospital coffee held in both hands, like she needed it to stay steady. Her face looked exhausted in a quiet way, the way people look when they've been afraid for hours and tried not to show it. The moment she saw my eyes open, her shoulders dropped like she'd finally released a breath she'd been holding all night. "Oh," she whispered, "you're awake." And that's when the fear really arrived. Not the fear of pain, not even the fear of dying. It was the fear of what her presence meant. Because if she was the one sitting here, then she was probably the one who found me. Just picture this for a second. You go down in your own home, and time keeps moving, and nobody comes, because nobody knows. No one hears you. No one checks. No one even has a reason to wonder where you are. I had told everyone I was fine for years. Lying there, staring at my neighbor, I realized I might have built a life where fine was just another word for unnoticed. Before that hospital room, my life was built out of small, quiet repetitions that didn't require anyone else. I woke up early, not because I had somewhere to be, but because sleeping in made the house feel even emptier. I'd shuffle into the kitchen, make coffee the same way every morning, and stand there with the mug warming my hands like it could replace what used to be there. The TV was my background noise. Not because I cared what was on, but because silence had teeth. Silence made me listen for things that weren't coming back. Footsteps, a voice calling from another room, a kettle on the stove that wasn't mine anymore. So I kept noise in the house, like a guard dog I didn't have to feed. I told people I was doing fine, and I said it in a way that ended conversations. I had learned the trick. Smile, keep it light, make a joke, change the subject. Because admitting loneliness felt like admitting failure, and after you lose someone you loved, pride becomes a kind of survival. It's not always a good kind, but it's what you grab when the ground under you feels unstable. I did errands in short bursts. Grocery store, pharmacy, gas. I'd nod at people, exchange polite words, then get back home fast, like home was a bunker and the world outside asked too many questions. Invitations came sometimes, neighbors offering coffee, old friends mentioning lunch, and I'd always find a reason to decline. I told myself I didn't want pity. I told myself I didn't want to be the widower everyone handled carefully, like a fragile box. The neighbor next door, she was the one person who didn't stop trying completely. Middle-aged, practical, the kind of person who kept her yard tidy and waved even when she didn't get much back. Every now and then she'd ask if I needed anything, or mention she was heading to the store, or offer to bring in a package if she saw it sitting too long. And every time, I kept it polite and distant. Appreciate it. I'm all right. Got everything handled. I treated kindness like it came with a price tag. Like if I accepted it, I'd owe something I couldn't pay back. And underneath that, there was something I didn't admit even to myself. Letting someone close meant letting them see how thin my life had become. Have you ever done that? Pushed away something good, not because you hated it, but because you were scared of what it would reveal about you? The strange thing about falling apart is that it rarely feels like a collapse at first. It feels like little inconveniences you can explain away if you're determined enough. And I was determined. Determined to stay fine. Determined to keep my life looking the way I said it was. It started with standing up too fast and seeing the room tilt for a second, like the world was a picture frame someone bumped. I'd grab the counter, wait it out, then tell myself it was nothing. Just age. Just not enough sleep. Just one of those things. I'd forget meals without meaning to. Not because there was no food, but because hunger didn't feel urgent anymore. I'd make coffee and tell myself I'd eat after I watched the news. Then hours would pass, and I'd realize the only thing I'd had all day was caffeine and stubbornness. Water was the same. I used to keep a glass by the sink. After my wife died, that habit disappeared along with so many other small habits, and I didn't replace it. Dehydration doesn't announce itself with a warning bell. It just quietly makes everything harder. I had blood pressure pills that were supposed to be as routine as brushing your teeth. I'd take them for a few days, then skip one because I ran out and didn't feel like driving to the pharmacy, or because I fell asleep in the chair and woke up disoriented, or because I looked at the bottle and felt that dull grief laziness that comes from thinking, what does it matter? That's the part people don't say out loud. Grief can make you careless in ways that don't look dramatic from the outside. It's not always crying. Sometimes it's neglect. Sometimes it's letting your own body slide down the priority list because the person who used to remind you mattered isn't there anymore. I also started getting headaches. Nothing sharp, more like a pressure that sat behind my eyes and made everything feel a little slower. I blamed the weather. I blamed the screen. I blamed anything except the truth that something in me was off. There were moments I almost asked for help. I'd be at the mailbox, and my neighbor would be outside, and she'd say something simple like, "You doing okay today?" In that tone people use when they're checking more than they're talking. And I'd feel a flicker, just a flicker, of wanting to say, actually, no. Wanting to admit I was tired in a way sleep didn't fix. Wanting to admit I'd been waking up with my heart thumping like it was trying to outrun something. But my mouth would do what it always did. It would protect my pride before it protected my body. Doing fine, I'd say. Just taking it easy. Try to put yourself in that mindset with me, where asking for help feels like weakness, where you'd rather risk being wrong than risk being seen. How many people do you think live like that without ever saying it out loud? I didn't realize I was building towards something. I thought I was just managing. But the truth was, I was drifting, and I had no one close enough to notice the current pulling me. It happened on an afternoon that didn't feel important until it became the only afternoon that mattered. I remember the light in my kitchen being thin and wintry, the kind that makes everything look washed out. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator cycling on and off, and the TV murmuring in the other room. I had stood up from my chair too quickly, again, because I'd heard the kettle click, and in my mind I was still the kind of man who could move on autopilot without consequences. The first warning wasn't pain. It was a strange softness in my legs, like the muscles had forgotten their job. The floor seemed to shift under me, not like an earthquake, but like I was on a boat that had suddenly met a wave. I put a hand out toward the counter, but my arm moved a half beat too slow. That delay, just that tiny delay, was enough. My vision pinched in at the edges. It wasn't dramatic, not like in movies. It was more like someone dimming the lights in a room you're trying to walk through. I remember thinking, sit down, just sit down, and then realizing I didn't know where the chair was anymore. The next thing I felt was weightlessness for a fraction of a second, followed by impact. My shoulder hit first, then my head, hard enough that a bright flash went off behind my eyes. I heard a sound that might have been my own breath leaving me, or a grunt, or nothing at all. The world went sideways, and suddenly the kitchen tiles were inches from my face. The cold was immediate. That shocked me more than the pain. The floor wasn't just cool, it was unforgiving, like it was determined to remind me how thin my skin had become. I tried to push up, but my arm slid, and my hand didn't find purchase. My mouth opened to call out, and the sound came out small, not a shout, not even a clear word, just air and a weak attempt at language. For a moment, I told myself I'd be fine. People fall. You get up. You laugh about it later. That's what you do. But as seconds stretched into something longer, I realized my body wasn't cooperating. My head throbbed in a deep, nauseating way. My vision wouldn't steady. When I tried to move my legs, they felt like they belonged to someone else. And then there was the worst part, a creeping, heavy confusion, like my mind was sliding away from the edges of reality. I remember staring at the baseboard and the dust under the cabinet and thinking, this is ridiculous. I'm on my own kitchen floor like an overturned chair. I remember trying again to speak and hearing my voice sound unfamiliar, thin and embarrassed. Time did something strange after that. It didn't pass in clean minutes. It broke into chunks, awareness, then blankness, then awareness again. I'd open my eyes and the light had shifted. The refrigerator would hum and stop. The house would go quiet again. I'd try to move, fail, and then feel myself drifting. And in one clear moment that cut through the fog, I understood something that terrified me more than the injury itself. No one was coming. There was no someone will notice. There was no spouse in the next room calling my name. No family member stopping by unannounced. I had built my life in a way where silence was normal. And now that silence had teeth. Just picture this for a moment. You're on the floor, your body is failing you, and the world outside your walls is still moving like you don't exist. Cars passing, someone walking a dog, a neighbor turning on their porch light. And you're there, alone, realizing that if you don't get help, you could simply fade. I tried to crawl. It was pathetic and slow. My palm slid against tile that felt slick with nothing, but my hand wouldn't grip. I managed maybe a foot, maybe less. My breath came shallow. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, not fast like panic, but heavy like effort. At some point, I must have blacked out completely, because the next thing I remember is sound, muffled voices, like they were speaking through walls. A knocking, then louder knocking. A woman's voice calling my name. And then, finally, a sudden burst of movement as the front door opened. I didn't see the door. I didn't even see their faces clearly. I saw shapes and shoes and the blur of uniforms. I felt hands, firm, practiced, checking my pulse, speaking in calm tones that I couldn't follow. Someone asked me questions I couldn't answer. Someone lifted my eyelids. Someone said something about my blood pressure being dangerously low, and another voice answered with numbers that sounded like they belonged to someone else's life. I remember being rolled, carefully, onto something firm. I remember a strap across my chest. I remember cold air hitting my skin as they moved me, and the shock of realizing I'd been on that floor long enough for my body to start giving up. The last thing I clearly remember before the ambulance ride swallowed everything was a familiar voice, my neighbor's, tight with fear, apologizing to someone, saying she'd noticed my lights hadn't been on, that she'd seen my newspaper still there, that something felt wrong. And even through the confusion, one thought hit me like a second fall. She noticed. She noticed when no one else would have. People talk about near-death moments like they're dramatic, like there's a clean line between here and gone, like the mind produces some meaningful final scene. Mine didn't. It was messy and humiliating and strangely quiet, like my brain was a radio losing signal in a storm. There were stretches where I felt nothing at all, and then sudden jolts of awareness that made no sense. Sirens that sounded far away, a vibration through a stretcher, a cold patch of air on my cheek, then darkness again. But inside that broken rhythm, something else happened. Not supernatural, not mystical, just my mind trying to grab onto whatever it could to keep itself oriented. And in doing that, it pulled up the most important things in my life like they were files someone had thrown onto the floor. I saw my wife's hands first. Not her face. Her hands. I saw them in our kitchen years ago, pushing stray flour off the counter with the side of her palm while she talked about something small and ordinary, something I barely remember now. I saw her reaching up on her toes to put a mug on the top shelf. I saw her tapping my shoulder when I was reading the paper, like she wanted attention without making a big deal of it. And the shame that came with that memory was sharp, because those hands weren't there now. The person who made my life a shared thing, someone who would have heard me fall, someone who would have called my name, someone who would have run in without hesitation, was gone. In the dark between awareness and nothingness, I realized I had used grief like a wall. I told myself I was protecting her memory by staying strong. I told myself I was honoring what we had by not turning into a lonely old man who needed people. But the truth was uglier. I had been hiding. I had been avoiding the simple, terrifying fact that life kept going, and I didn't know how to live it without her. And by hiding, I had made my world smaller and smaller until it could fit inside a house with the curtains half closed. You know what's strange? I didn't regret the big things first. I regretted the small, stupid choices that seemed harmless when I made them. Skipping meals, ignoring water, leaving my medication bottle on the counter like it was optional, letting weeks pass without really talking to anyone, turning down invitations with that practiced smile, acting like "I'm fine" was a badge of honor instead of a warning sign. Have you ever ignored something important until it was almost too late? Not because you didn't know better, but because admitting it felt like admitting you weren't in control? That's what it was for me, control. I had lost my wife, and somewhere deep in me, I decided I couldn't risk losing anything else, so I tried to control the only thing I thought I could: how much of myself I let the world see. Then my neighbor's face surfaced in my mind. and it didn't come with warmth at first. It came with embarrassment. I remembered all the times she'd offered help and I'd shut it down. The times she'd asked a simple question and I'd answered like a man guarding a secret. The way I'd kept conversations short because I didn't want her to notice my hands shaking some days, or the emptiness behind my eyes, or the fact that my house didn't smell like food anymore. And I realized something painful and plain. I had mistaken kindness for pity because pity was easier to reject. Kindness is harder. Kindness asks you to be human. It asks you to admit you can't do everything alone. There was a moment, one of the clearer moments, where I could almost feel my body lying somewhere else, like I was aware of distance. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't open my eyes properly, but my mind was awake enough to understand the terror of that helplessness. Not the terror of death, the terror of being unreachable. Try to feel what I felt, even briefly. Imagine knowing you're still in there, but you can't signal anyone, can't explain what hurts, can't ask for a glass of water, can't say a name. Imagine realizing that if the wrong person had found you, or if no one had found you at all, your life could have ended with a refrigerator humming in an empty kitchen. And in that ugly, stripped-down mental space, the truth finally landed without excuses. Loneliness isn't just sad. It's dangerous. It makes you careless. It makes you proud in the wrong ways. It makes you believe you're tougher than you are, because admitting you need people feels like weakness. And then one ordinary afternoon proves you wrong. The last clear thought I remember having before everything went dark again wasn't a grand revelation. It was a simple, desperate regret. If I get another chance, I can't keep living like no one has to notice me. Because the worst part of that floor wasn't the pain. The worst part was realizing how easily I could disappear, and how many things I never said, not because time ran out suddenly, but because I kept postponing being seen. Coming back wasn't like flipping a switch. It was like surfacing from deep water, inch by inch, with my lungs unsure if they remembered how to work. Sound arrived first, soft beeping, a distant hiss, the murmur of voices that didn't belong to my house. Then light, filtered and pale, pressing through my eyelids like something trying to wake me up gently. When I finally opened my eyes, the room didn't look real. Not because it was magical, but because hospitals have a way of stripping life down to essentials. White walls, plastic rails, sheets that feel stiff and unfamiliar. The smell of antiseptic, sharp enough to sit at the back of your throat. My tongue felt thick. My mouth was dry, like I'd been breathing desert air. I tried to swallow, and it hurt a little, and when I tried to speak, nothing came out the first time. Just a thin exhale. I blinked again and saw the shapes around me sharpen into details. A bag of fluid hanging from a pole, wires leading from my chest to a monitor. A blood pressure cuff wrapped around my arm like a reminder that my body was being watched now, whether I liked it or not. Then I turned my eyes to the side and saw her. My neighbor sat in a chair that looked like it was designed to punish people for caring. She held a paper cup of coffee with both hands, not sipping, just holding it. Her eyes were on me, steady but tired, like she hadn't slept properly in a long time. When she saw that I was truly awake and looking at her, her face changed in a way that made my chest tighten. Relief, first, then something that looked like she was trying not to cry. "Oh," she whispered, like the word was fragile. "You're awake." I tried to answer. My throat scratched, and my voice came out rough, barely a voice at all. What are you doing here?" She leaned forward slightly, careful, like she didn't want to overwhelm me. "I called," she said. I called for help. You didn't have your lights on. And your paper was still there. And I knocked, and you didn't answer." She swallowed. I didn't want to be nosy, but it felt wrong. I stared at her, and for a second my mind went blank. Not from confusion this time, but from the weight of what she'd just confirmed. She had been the one to notice my absence. Not family, not friends, not a coworker, not anyone with my last name. Her. A woman I'd kept at arm's length because I didn't want pity. I tried to move my hand, and it trembled a little as it rose off the sheet. Not dramatically, just weakly, like an old engine turning over. I let it fall back down, and my eyes burned in a way that surprised me. Tears that weren't really about pain. It was shame, plain and hot, because I remembered all the times she'd offered help, and I'd said I was fine. I remembered how I'd smiled politely like she was just being neighborly, like her concern didn't have any weight. I remembered treating her kindness like it was something to keep outside my door. And now she was sitting here in a hospital, looking like she'd carried fear for me when I wasn't even conscious to feel it myself. Have you ever realized someone cared about you more than you deserved at the time? Not because you were a bad person, but because you were closed off and you didn't notice what was right in front of you? A nurse came in then, quiet footsteps, practiced hands. She checked my monitors and asked me simple questions: my name, the date, where I was. I answered slowly, my voice still rough, my brain still catching up. She explained in calm terms that I'd hit my head, that I'd been dehydrated, that my blood pressure had dropped dangerously low, and that I was lucky my neighbor acted when she did. Lucky. That word sat in my chest like a stone. Because luck wasn't what I'd been relying on all these years. I'd been relying on isolation. On the idea that nothing would happen to me that I couldn't handle alone. My neighbor stood up as the nurse adjusted something near my fore. "I'll give you a minute," she said softly, like she didn't want to intrude. But I didn't want her to leave. Not yet. That frightened me too, because it meant the wall I'd built was cracking. "Please," I croaked, and the word came out before pride could stop it. "Don't go." She paused, looked at me, and nodded once. "Okay," she said. "I'm here." And lying there, with the monitor beeping steadily beside me, I realized something simple and crushing. The first person I let in after nearly dying wasn't family. It was the neighbor I'd been pushing away. Recovery didn't feel inspiring. It felt slow, inconvenient, and humbling in a way I wasn't prepared for. In the hospital, people moved my body like it belonged to a project, not a person, lifting my arm to place a cuff, adjusting my pillow, checking my eyes, asking the same questions over and over to make sure my brain was still mine. They were kind, but they were efficient, and that efficiency made it impossible to pretend I was in control. When they got me out of bed the first time, it wasn't heroic. A physical therapist stood close, one hand ready near my elbow, and told me to shift my weight slowly. My legs shook like they were remembering an old injury. I took 2 steps and had to sit down, breathing harder than I wanted to admit. The shame came quick, because in my head I was still the man who could fix anything, carry groceries in one trip, climb a ladder without thinking twice. But my body didn't care who I thought I was. I went home with paperwork, a schedule, and instructions that sounded simple until you're the one trying to follow them. Drink water. Eat regularly. Take the medication on time. Move carefully. No rushing. No pretending dizziness is nothing. Home safety changes too. Grab bars in the bathroom, a non-slip mat, better lighting in the hallway, a reminder that a simple fall isn't simple when you're alone. The hardest part wasn't the headache that lingered for weeks or the bruising that made my shoulder ache when I reached for a cabinet. The hardest part was walking back into my quiet house and hearing how loud loneliness sounded now that I knew what it could cost. My neighbor checked in the first day I was home. She didn't make it dramatic. She knocked, asked if I needed anything from the store, then handed me a small bag with a few easy foods, soup, crackers, fruit, like she'd thought it through. I felt the old reflex rise in me, that stiff urge to refuse, to say I had it handled. But something in me had changed. Not into a different person, just into a more honest one. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it without attaching an apology or a joke. I saw her relax a little, like gratitude was easier for her to accept than denial. The next week, I agreed to a grief support group the hospital recommended. I didn't want to. I hated the idea of sitting in a circle with strangers talking about pain like it was a hobby. But the first meeting surprised me. Nobody tried to fix me. Nobody gave me cheap advice. People just told the truth about how loss warps your routines, your appetite, your care for yourself, your willingness to be seen. And when my turn came, I found myself saying something I'd never said out loud, that I'd been fine in a way that was slowly killing me. Have you ever realized you weren't actually strong? You were just stubborn? That you weren't independent? You were isolated? My neighbor became part of the new routine in a way that didn't feel like replacement or betrayal. It felt like a safety net I'd refused to acknowledge. She'd wave when she saw me in the driveway. Then sometimes she'd ask a simple question. "Did you eat today? Did you take your meds? Want company for a short walk?" At first, I said yes to one thing a week, like I was testing the water. A 10-minute walk down the street. Sitting on the porch for a few minutes while the sun went down early. Talking about nothing important. Weather, her work, a movie she'd seen. Until, without planning it, something important slipped in. I told her my wife's name. I told her how the house felt after the funeral, how the silence didn't arrive all at once but crept in, room by room. I told her I'd been afraid that accepting care would mean I was letting go, that it would disrespect the love I'd had. She listened without rushing me. Then she said something simple that stayed with me. Letting people care about you doesn't erase her. It just keeps you here. Just picture this for a moment. How many of us treat help like an insult when it's actually a lifeline? How many of us think being seen is dangerous when being unseen is what really puts us at risk? I didn't become perfect. I still had days where I wanted to shut the door and disappear into old habits. But now I noticed those days sooner. I drank water even when I didn't feel thirsty. I set alarms for my meds. I answered calls instead of letting them ring out. I started saying yes, not to big reinventions, but to small human moments that made my life feel connected again. And the most surprising part was this. The connection didn't make me weak. It made me safer. I used to think loneliness was just an emotion, something you carried quietly, something you handled with pride and distractions, and the lie of, I'm fine. I didn't understand that loneliness can become a practical danger, the kind that turns a simple fall into a life or death situation, because nobody is close enough to notice you're missing. When I look back now, I don't feel angry at myself as much as I feel sad. Sad that I treated kindness like a threat. Sad that I protected my grief so fiercely I almost let it take me with it. I loved my wife deeply, and losing her changed me, but almost losing my own life showed me something I didn't want to admit. Love doesn't only live in the past, and accepting care doesn't betray what you had. It honors it by keeping you alive long enough to remember it well. If you're watching this and you recognize even a little of my stubbornness, I won't tell you what to do. I'll just ask you to imagine something. Picture your home on an ordinary day, quiet, familiar, comfortable, and then picture what happens if you don't answer the phone, if you don't turn on the lights, if you don't show up the way you usually do. Who would notice first? And if the answer makes your chest feel tight, maybe that's not weakness. Maybe that's your life asking you to build one small bridge back to people. Because if you still have the chance to say something kind, to accept a cup of coffee, to answer a knock at the door, don't leave it for later. Time is borrowed, and sometimes the rarest gift isn't more time at all. Sometimes it's simply being seen.